My son builds buildings. My daughter just cleans them. That was the sentence that started the whole mess. My dad said it like it was a joke meant to keep the table laughing. And it worked. A few low chuckles rolled around the table. Glasses clinked. Someone tapped a fork against a plate while the band in the ballroom drifted through another slow song. I wasn't supposed to hear it. I had stepped away from the table to wait for the bartender to bring back my coat. The bar stood just across the room, close enough that voices carried when people forgot to lower them. 10 feet? Maybe less? Close enough. The wedding was for my brother Daniel. The reception hall overlooked Lake Michigan, all tall windows and polished floors. Investors filled half the tables, men in dark suits talking about permits, square footage, financing. My dad loved those conversations. He leaned forward now, telling them about Daniel's newest project. River Point Tower, he said proudly. 28 floors. Glass everywhere. My son's biggest build yet. Someone asked, casually, "And what does your daughter do?" Dad didn't hesitate. My daughter just cleans buildings. I'd heard worse growing up. That part wasn't new. What caught my attention was something else. Across the table, Andrew Cole from Cole and Harrington Development had stopped halfway through lifting his drink. He didn't laugh with the others. Instead, he looked past them, straight at me, not curious, recognizing, like he'd just matched a name to a face he hadn't expected to see in this room. Andrew Cole kept looking at me like he was trying to connect a memory to a face. Daniel noticed it first. "You know my sister?" he asked. Andrew tilted his head slightly. "I'm not sure yet." Then he dropped the subject and looked back down at his glass. The conversation rolled forward again like nothing had happened. Plates moved. Speeches started. Investors leaned in toward Daniel, asking questions about the project. Someone finally asked how he got started. My dad answered before Daniel even opened his mouth. "I backed his first project," he said proudly. $200,000. Best investment I ever made. A few men at the table nodded. Daniel smiled the kind of smile people wear when the story has already been told 100 times. "Dad believed in me early," he said. I took a small sip of water and watched the pattern on the tablecloth. 4 years ago, I sat at that same kitchen table asking for help too. "I need $20,000. I told my parents. "Just an expansion loan. We're picking up more contracts." Dad didn't look up from his phone. "For what, my company?" He shook his head. "Cleaning businesses don't scale." "Olivia," Mom added gently. "Maybe keep it small. Less stress." That conversation ended right there. 7 years ago, I had started the company with 2 employees and an old van. No investment, no backup, just contracts and long nights. Back at the wedding table, Andrew finally spoke again. "Daniel," he said, calm and direct. "Who's handling building operations once River Point opens?" Daniel shrugged. "We'll outsource it." Andrew nodded once. "You should look at North Bridge." Then his eyes moved back to me. Andrew kept looking at me. Not rude, just focused, like he was sorting through a memory. Daniel noticed it. "You sure we haven't met before?" he asked. Andrew shook his head slowly. "Not in person." That phrase lingered for a second. Not in person. Someone across the table laughed and pulled the conversation back to River Point Tower. Permits, delays, cost projections. Investors trading opinions like they were part of the blueprint. Daniel leaned into it. "We're planning 28 floors," he said. "Retail on the first levels. Residential above. Full mixed use." Dad nodded with quiet pride. "My son builds things that last." Andrew rested his fingers against the side of his glass. Thinking, "Who's handling building operations once it opens?" he asked. Daniel shrugged. "We'll outsource it. Standard management contract." "You already have someone lined up?" Andrew asked. "Not yet," Daniel said lightly. "Operations isn't the complicated part." One of the older investors across the table leaned forward. It becomes complicated the first time the elevators stop working at 2 in the morning, he said, or when 300 tenants start calling. A few people chuckled. Andrew nodded. That's why we use North Bridge. The name settled on the table. Daniel frowned slightly. North Bridge Facility Management. Andrew repeated. Dad waved a hand dismissively. A cleaning company. Andrew shook his head. No, they run full building operations, staffing, maintenance, safety systems, tenant response, the work that keeps a property functioning. Daniel looked curious now. You worked with them before. Andrew nodded. 3 of our buildings. Then he turned toward me. Olivia, he said calmly. You've heard of them. Right. The room went quiet in that subtle way people don't notice until it's already happened. Everyone at the table was looking at me now. Waiting. Everyone at the table was looking at me now. Not the casual wedding glance people give between bites of dinner. The other kind. The one that means a conversation has suddenly shifted direction. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Olivia, he said slowly. You've heard of North Bridge? I gave a small nod. Yeah. Dad chuckled like that settled the matter. Facilities stuff, he said. Cleaning crews. Andrew didn't react. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out his phone. Not exactly, he said. The investor beside him leaned forward. You use them for your properties. Right? Andrew nodded. 3 buildings so far. Daniel looked surprised. Which ones? Riverfront Plaza, West Harbor Towers, Lincoln Hotel? Someone at the table let out a quiet whistle. Those contracts are serious, he said. Andrew turned his phone toward me. I've been emailing the CEO of Northbridge for months, he said calmly. Olivia Bennett. On the screen was a message thread. My name at the top. Daniel leaned closer to look. Wait, he said. That's your email. I nodded once. Dad frowned. Hold on. Northbridge manages commercial buildings. Correct. Andrew said. Daniel stared at me now. You're telling me you run that company? I took a slow breath. Yeah. Silence settled across the table for a moment. Even the music from the dance floor sounded farther away. Andrew slipped his phone back into his jacket. I thought the name sounded familiar, he said. And in that quiet moment, I watched something strange happen. The entire room started seeing me differently. Daniel stared at me like I'd just told him the sky was green. You're serious, he said. Yeah. Dad leaned forward slowly. Olivia, Northbridge manages commercial properties. Big ones. I know. Andrew finally stepped in again. Northbridge currently operates 12 buildings across downtown Chicago, he said calmly. About 86 employees. One of the investors blinked. That's a serious operation. Another one turned to me. You built that? I nodded. Started small. 2 people and an old van. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. Wait. Hold on. He looked at Andrew. You're saying the company managing Riverfront Plaza is hers? Andrew nodded. And West Harbor Towers, he added. And the Lincoln Hotel? Someone across the table let out a low whistle. Dad looked like someone had unplugged him. That doesn't make sense, he muttered. I almost laughed at that. Daniel looked back at me. Why didn't you ever say anything? I shrugged. I did. He frowned. When every time someone asked what I did, Dad shook his head. No. You said you cleaned buildings. Yeah, I said, because that's the part everyone heard. Andrew leaned back slightly. Facilities management means running the systems that keep those buildings alive. Maintenance crews, logistics, compliance, staffing. One investor nodded. That's the hardest part of property management. Daniel looked at me again. Slower this time. You've been running that company for how long? 7 years. The table went quiet again. Dad finally spoke. Why didn't you explain it properly? I looked at him. Honestly, would you have listened? Dad didn't answer my question. He kept staring at the table like the pattern in the wood had suddenly become very important. Daniel broke the silence first. 7 years, he asked. Yeah. You started that right after college. Pretty much. Andrew spoke again, calm and steady. Northbridge currently runs operations for 12 commercial properties, he said. That includes full building management, staffing, maintenance, safety compliance. One of the investors leaned forward. You handle maintenance too. Everything, I said. Maintenance teams, safety inspections, system checks, cleaning crews, night shifts. The parts tenants notice only when something goes wrong. He nodded slowly. That's the hardest side of the business. Daniel rubbed his face, still trying to process it. I thought you were doing residential cleaning. I almost smiled. That's what people assumed. Dad finally looked up. You could have explained that you were running a company. I tried, I said quietly. Mom had moved closer during the conversation. I noticed her now standing just behind Dad's chair. Olivia, she said carefully, you always told people you cleaned buildings. Because I do, I said. I just never stopped there. Andrew added, almost casually. She also manages 86 employees and contracts worth several $1,000,000. One of the investors chuckled. That explains why Northbridge beat our bid for the Lincoln Hotel. Dad blinked slowly. You compete with companies like that every week. Daniel leaned back in his chair and studied me again. This time it wasn't the look a brother gives a younger sister. It was the look someone gives a rival they hadn't realized was already in the same game. The wedding ended. The music faded. By midnight, the ballroom had emptied and everyone went back to their own lives. I assumed the conversation at that table would fade with it. Honestly, I hoped it would. For 7 years, Northbridge had grown quietly, one contract at a time. No attention, no announcements, just work. 2 days after the wedding, my phone rang. Olivia Bennett, a man asked. Yes. We met at Daniel's reception. I was sitting 2 seats down from Andrew Cole. I remembered him, one of the investors. I didn't realize you were running Northbridge, he said. We've got a property on Michigan Avenue that needs a new operations team. Would you be open to reviewing the building? Send the details, I said. Later that afternoon, another message came through. This one was an email from Andrew. Good seeing you again. If you're open to it, we should talk about future projects. Andrew had copied 2 property partners on the message. That explained the calls. People hadn't suddenly discovered Northbridge. Andrew had simply reminded them the company existed. 3 weeks passed before I heard from him again. His voice sounded calm when he called. You've probably heard about River Point Tower. Some of it, I said. Construction delays had already started making their way through the industry. They're having trouble lining up operations planning. Andrew continued. I understood what he meant. Running a building is different from constructing one. He paused for a moment. Daniel may need someone who already knows how to keep a place like that running. Daniel showed up at my office on a Tuesday morning. No warning. No assistant calling ahead. Just Daniel standing in my doorway looking like he hadn't slept. The coffee in my cup had gone cold. That bitter smell hung in the air. Hey, he said. Hey. He stepped inside slowly, looking around at the office. Not impressed. Not unimpressed either. Just taking it in. You've got a nice setup, he said. Works for me. He nodded once. Then he got to the point. River Point needs an operations partner. I leaned back in my chair. That's so. Andrew thinks Northbridge could handle it. I didn't say anything. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. It's a big project. 28 floors, retail, residential, full services. I know the building. He looked at me. I figured you would. Silence for a second. Then he said it. Look, I know we haven't always taken your business seriously. That was the closest thing to an apology Daniel Bennett had ever attempted. I folded my arms. Northbridge reviews every contract the same way. I said, scope, staff requirements, risk. He nodded slowly. So you'll consider it. I'll review it. Daniel looked relieved and uncomfortable at the same time. Funny thing is, I didn't feel like I'd won anything, just different ground under my feet. Tell me something. Have you ever had the power shift in a relationship and suddenly not know what to do with it? River Point Tower opened about 6 months later. Daniel invited me to the launch event. He said it was important for the team. I understood what he meant. Investors were there. Partners, reporters, people moving through the lobby like they owned a piece of the skyline. By then, Northbridge had the operations contract. 28 floors, 300 residential units, retail across the first 2 levels, 86 people from my company rotating shifts to keep the place running the way tenants expected. Funny how things come together. Dad found me near the bar. "You look busy these days," he said. "Yeah." He hesitated a moment before speaking again. "I didn't realize your company was handling this building." "It is." He nodded slowly, still taking it in. A minute later, Daniel walked over with Andrew Cole. Andrew raised his glass slightly toward me. "Best operations team we've hired in years," he said. Daniel smiled, a little more relaxed than I'd ever seen him around investors. "Turns out my sister keeps buildings running." Dad looked between us, then straightened a little and spoke to the group standing nearby. "This is my daughter Olivia," he said. "Her company manages the operations here." Simple sentence, but it sounded different coming from him. I didn't feel triumphant standing there, just calm. For a long time, I'd let people define my work in smaller words than it deserved. Now I understood something clearer. You don't need everyone to understand what you're building. You just need to keep building it anyway.